related to electric utility regulation, modernization, rate review proceedings, distribution, generation, rate reductions, and other matters revolving around electric utility regulation. The bill is reported for the Committee on Commerce and Labor with an amendment nature substitute. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a floor substitute offered by Delegate Rasool that is available online and has been distributed.
The delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I would yield to the delegate from Roanoke City.
Delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my floor substitute.
Delegate Rasool withdraws his floor substitute. The delegate from Scott, Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would move that we adopt the committee substitute.
Shall the committee substitute be agreed to? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The committee substitute is agreed to. Delegate Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, here we are again. This is the, I told, when we were here on the floor, we advised the members of the body that we would continue to work on this product and continue to try to make this product better. And thankful to a lot of folks in the chamber here that we were able to address a lot of the issues move forward. I'd like to thank my chief co-patron, the gentleman from Henrico, Delegate Bagby, for his help in this and on this legislation and continuing on this legislation. And I would say that we addressed the issue of the double dipping that was proposed through an amendment by the gentleman from Charlottesville on the floor of the House, and we've addressed that through the committee process. So where we are now is that we still have the immediate pass-through of tax relief on both Dominion and AEP. We had the immediate customer bill credits of $133 million for Dominion on July 1, an additional $67 million later, and also ABCO $10 million. We have a mechanism included in the bill to invest in the grid and renewables without raising rates, and that's very important. We also have the part from my seatmate about the underground pilot project up in Haymarket, and we also in the committee corrected a error in that it had some language in there that stated that something could be overground, but we corrected that in the committee. We also asked that in this bill is there's no possibility of a base rate increase until 2024. We have allowing in the bill allowing customers to store energy for their own use. This has been through a process with the governor's office. They've been very helpful bringing in groups together, and also other groups as we have been through the process. But this is something that is going to, I think this bill will transform the electric grid. We are going to have new technologies moving forward. We are going to have renewables. There is a 5,000 megawatts approved in the public interest in the bill, and that is also includes not only solar, but it also includes wind. So that's a very important step forward. And it also requires that before grid investments and before these grid transformation investments can be made, that the state corporation would have to make those approvals. Ladies and gentlemen, is it a perfect bill? No, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a good bill moving forward. It is a way to get there. It is a way to address a lot of issues that a lot of us, a lot of you in this chamber have been concerned about over the years. And we are going to be looking at energy efficiency and the Energy Share Program, which are very important, I know, to a lot of individuals in this room. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it does ask the utilities, both AEP and Dominion, to report on two items. One is providing broadband internet services using their fiber that's already in the ground, and number two, we asked them to step up in economic development activities, particularly in the rural area, including marketing assistance. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you pass the bill.
The delegate from James City County, Delegate Pogge.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, with a delegate yield for a question.
Mr. Speaker,
Delegate from Scott yield to a question. Delegate yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is does this bill restore the oversight of the State Corporation Commission?
I would answer the delegate from James City in this way. It does restore regulatory oversight to the SCC. They will be doing rate cases in a triennial. They will be doing triennial reviews. They will be able to do refunds as a result of those triennial reviews. They also will be approving any of the grid transformation investments prior to the utility investing in those grid transformations. So I would say the answer is yes, that the SCC will be restored some of that authority.
Follow up?
Yeah, Doug, I'd like to ask another question.
Yes.
Delegate yield for another question.
Yes, I yield.
Delegate yields.
So you confirm that in the substitute that we're voting on now, is that where the SCC oversight is restored?
Yes, what I spoke about is restored, and also they may order customer refunds if enough investments in grid and renewable energy have not been made. So, yes.
Delegate from Roanoke City, Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we've heard a lot about this bill, but I wanted the body to recall the bill we had in 2014, not 2015, where we talked about how we were going to expense out the costs related to the North Anna nuclear project. And there was a big fight that year because many of us believe that those capital expenses should be expensed out properly. If you have any capital expense, the life of that expense, if it's a 30-year expense, you've got to spread it all out. Well, what happened in that 2014 bill is we decided that we were going to take all those expenses and accelerate those expenses. And the product of that means that there were fewer dollars that were available in refunds to ratepayers. Now, what we have is quite a thick bill. There are a lot of pieces in this bill. But there's a very specific piece in here that, for one reason or another, has not been on the negotiating table with the utilities, and it has been a non-starter. And it has to do with cost recovery. This will essentially allow, starting on line 887 of the bill, will allow the utility to front-end and overload expenses, therefore being able to come up with very, very fudgy accounting and adversely impact ratepayers, in my opinion. There are a lot of good things in this bill, and there are some good reasons for people to vote for the bill. The question that came up earlier about SCC authority, there is a little bit of SCC authority that is restored, but there's a lot that is not restored, specifically with the reasonable and prudent language around the undergrounding. This allows the utility to be able to move forward without needing to meet that threshold. We've already predetermined that a lot of these investments are in the public interest in this bill without having to go through a real reasonable and prudent approach. So while there are a lot of pieces to vote for the bill, the reason why, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm going to be voting against the bill is because we had such a big fight over one tiny paragraph back in 2014. And that is mixed in with pages and pages of issues, and we are about to rubber stamp that one specific issue that gave us so much heartburn, many of us, so much heartburn back in 2014. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to vote against the bill.
The delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill really should have been 10 or 12 different bills. I know I'm new here, but it's not often that we see a bill that has so many different provisions, that do so many different things all at once. I've heard some people refer to opposition to Christmas tree bills. Well, this is the definition of a Christmas tree, Mr. Speaker. We've got all kinds of gifts in there. We've got all kinds of gifts sitting underneath the tree. There are a lot of things in this bill that are good. There's provisions for more solar panels, for wind farms. There are provisions for undergrounding, for hydraulic pump storage facilities, for grid transformation. There are all kinds of good things in here, Mr. Speaker. But the reason I believe all those good things are in here is because there are some things that are unpalatable to this body that we would have never voted for on their own. Mr. Speaker, this entire process on this bill from the start has been flawed. It has been designed from the start to make sure that this bill is hard to oppose so that they can get the things that they want under the radar. And Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that we should be doing this. We've already passed one version of this bill, which I was opposed to. I don't believe that we should be passing the second version of the bill, which the Senate will probably conform the previous version to. Mr. Speaker, it may be too late. It probably is too late to kill this entire process. But this should not be how we make legislation. We've heard a lot about how the SCC has stood in the way of green energy projects. But the way to get the SCC out of the way is not to cut them out entirely. Mr. Speaker, we could have gone to the SCC and asked them, how do we revise the tests that you use? How do we adjust the guidelines so that you will approve more green energy projects? We could have gone a different way about this and come up with an entirely different result to get the things that we want, to get all the presents under the Christmas tree. We don't have to get the whole tree. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Augusta, Delegate Landis.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, there are a lot of good things in this bill. But as the old adage goes, let's talk about the rest of the story. Actually, let's talk about the history of the Commonwealth. Many years ago, there was created this entity within state government called the State Corporation Commission. And that entity was given the responsibility to regulate utilities and other business entities within the Commonwealth of Virginia. The reason that that Corporation Commission was created was to depoliticize and to more professionally review the rules and regulations that regulate these monopolies that we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia, or those businesses that are regulated by the Corporation Commission. The importance of that, I think, is sometimes lost in the discussion that we're having and debating this bill and the prior bill. For some of us, that State Corporation Commission plays an important role. It depoliticizes. It also provides independent oversight separate from the legislative branch and the executive branch to these issues. Now, why is that important? It's important because we are a part-time legislature. And in fact, when these rate cases are brought before the State Corporation Commission, they're cases. They're complicated legal and regulatory issues. That is why we elect 3 judges to render and determine those types of cases and issues. So I would just remind the House, before you vote on this bill, and I plan to vote against it as I voted against the prior bill, because we are not restoring any real authority to the State Corporation Commission. We either give them the authority that they constitutionally and statutorily have, or we don't. We either appoint them and assume by appointing those independent individuals, those 3 judges, that they have the responsibility to make the determinations that they've been given, or we don't. And I would say, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, if you want to support and continue down this road, then we need to come back and repeal the State Corporation Commission and remove the judges that we have appointed and elected to provide this function. So, Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I ask you to oppose the bill.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
And Mr. Speaker, just give a couple personal thoughts. Been working on this with the chairman for a number of weeks, and Delegate Bagby. Just personal thoughts, not because of my documentaries being filmed or anything like that, but there are a number of things in here that I think we really need to consider that I think are important to a lot of our constituents. If you look for Western Prince William, it has the undergrounding in there that's critical. It's something that constituents have asked for repeatedly. They have protested, they have spent their own money, they have spent their time, and it's in the bill. It will be underground. The question was raised because it was said earlier, well, there was a provision in there, it was kind of standard language, we could build above ground afterwards. Worked with the chairman. It's out of both bills. That language is out of both bills. For Western Prince William, for Haymarket, the power lines will be built underground like you want if this bill passes. If this bill fails to pass, you will have 110-foot power lines in your backyard. But the chairman's talked about all the other good things in here, the hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to come back to the consumers, and that's true. And again, if this bill fails, it won't. The tax pass-through won't. But one of the things I've appreciated, and we talked about the Christmas tree, this bill probably saved me 12 hours of work because there are other bills in here. There's that language from the Haymarket bill that I talked about. But something the chairman didn't talk enough about is all the environmental renewable bills, the language that is in this bill. There's a bill on efficiency that everybody wanted that I introduced. It's in this bill. It will encourage the saving of energy, which is what everybody always talks about. But this bill does. It accomplishes. We talk about wind and solar and the encouraging of that. It's in this bill. 5,000 megawatts of wind and solar will be new in the Commonwealth of Virginia if this bill passes. If it does not, it goes away. The RIM test, which everybody has talked about, and how that, if we can modify that just a little bit, it will encourage more renewables. It's in this bill. It's the fourth bill that we've put in this bill. You may want to call it a Christmas tree. I call it an advancement on promoting renewables in the Commonwealth of Virginia. This bill will get more money to your consumers, get money back. It will bury power lines in Western Prince William, and it will improve the environment of the Commonwealth of Virginia by promoting renewables that we've declared time and time again. There's a goal of this chamber and a goal of the Commonwealth. If we pass the bill, it happens. If we fail, it doesn't. I hope it will be the will of the body to pass this bill, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Plum.
Speaking of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd like to add to the history for a little bit, if I might, and go back to when I was first running for office in the 1970s. In the 1970s, the popular thing to do was to run against VEPCO. Everybody remember the Virginia Electric Power Company? They had such irregular service, its rates varied so that you could pick up a lot of political points by running against the electric company. I and a lot of others did that, and we had good reason to do that. But I have to tell you, too, when I came here, I learned a lesson. When I took a look at what was happening in the electric utility regulation, the SCC was not the answer. The SCC was part of the problem. And so what we fashioned over a number of years, starting in 2007, was a deregulatory approach to how it is that we could maintain, because you see, Dominion is not a government agency. Dominion is an investor-owned private utility, it's private business, and because it has a monopoly standing, we do have regulatory functions. But the test for us then was to figure out how to put together a regulatory framework that would incorporate business incentives to make sure that VEPCO, then now Dominion, did a better job. How they could expect a reasonable rate of return, but at the same time have the flexibility of moving forward on some things we want to move forward on. You see, when I was first promoting the idea of renewable energy, We couldn't get the renewable energy proposals through the company, through the SCC, because under traditional regulation, it wouldn't meet the model, it wouldn't meet the formula. So that's how we got into deregulation. So why are we back to regulation? Because when Dominion was in a deregulated format, nobody could compete with them. Why couldn't they compete? We got the best electric rates around. We seem to, in this discussion, forget the fact. I was talking to a constituent the other day who, with some amazement, said, oh, I never think about it. My electric bill is so low. And relative to the states of the Union, that's true. And relative to the South, it's true also. So what we got to do is to not turn back the clock to a traditional regulatory system that puts too many barriers in the way of a private utility, an investor-owned utility, to move forward at a time we've got to move forward. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got to move forward. Our grid system is way behind time. To a traditional regulatory system, I'm not sure how soon it's going to be before you get a chance to upgrade the grid. We are now writing into law in the public interest these renewables because we couldn't get them through the State Corporation Commission because they wouldn't meet the traditional regulatory model. So make no mistake about it, these bills that are called Dominion bills, this bill, for example, is a product of about 30 stakeholders. And seldom do I know instances in which bills have that many people working together on them to figure out what's the best combination of regulation and what's the best combination of incentives and how can we make this private company work to the benefit of its customers. And what came out of that was this. It is a long bill because it's a complicated subject. You can't twiddle this thing down to simple notions. But from that, the governor appointed, I thought in a very insightful way, an independent mediator to put together these diverse interests. And when you put together these diverse interests, I think you come out with one heck of a bill. I'm going to be proud to go home and talk to people about how quickly they're going to get their tax return money back, how soon they're going to get back monies from over-earnings, how it is that we're now going to, in a substantial way, be a major player on the national scene with renewables. And how is it that's going to come about? It's going to come about because of a bill passing like this. I hope you'll join us in passing the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Fauquier, Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Wise, or the delegate from Wise, yield for a couple of questions?
Delegate from Scott, yield for a question.
Scott, sorry.
I yield.
Delegate yields.
The Wise gentleman from Scott.
The wise gentleman.
Yeah. I would like.
Delegate Weber.
I would like to ask the gentleman in regards to this piece of legislation. Will those who are consumers of Dominion, once this legislation passes, see lower rates?
Yes, they should see lower rates. They should see immediate customer bill credits and also tax reform, tax credits from the federal tax reforms recently passed in Congress.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Delegate yield for another question.
Yield.
Delegate yields.
In regards to renewable energy, as Delegate Plum had just mentioned, how, with the exception of this bill, does the General Assembly express its will that we should invest in more green energy?
Well, right now, I would say to the gentleman, this would be the only way the General Assembly could express its will is by passing legislation. What has to happen now is the utility would have to file a request to build a certain solar farm or a wind farm, and then they would go under what we call now is the RIM test, and the State Corporation Commission would weigh that to see if they pass it. Right now, most of those renewable projects will not pass that initial RIM test, and what we're saying is you only have to, instead of having to satisfy 3, we're going back to a 2-part test, and now you will be able to pass that RIM test.
One last question, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate yield for another question.
I yield.
Delegate yields.
So if the electric utility chooses to invest in a green energy project, can the SEC still reject that project?
Yes, they could still reject that project. It still comes under the grid transformation, and it still has to go in front of the SEC. But, of course, we're giving them guidance in this bill that you don't have to satisfy all 3 of that RIM test.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move the pending question.
Delegate Orrock moves the pending question. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The pending question is moved. Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 65, noes 30, abstentions 3.
Ayes 65, noes 30, abstentions 3. The bill passes.